Welcome, everyone. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to Savoring Startup Stories, where we want to highlight companies that changed the way we eat and drink. My name is Freddy. I'm a Kearney principal based out of Zurich, Switzerland, and I specialize in the food and beverage industry. And with me is my wonderful colleague, Kari. Kari, do you quickly want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everyone. So I'm Kari Armstrong, also a principal in the consumer goods practice. I focus a lot on growth strategy, marketing effectiveness, and new business models. And a fun fact that as well as being an avid consumer of the company we're going to be talking about today, I also worked quite closely with our guest speaker in his previous life at Kearney. So very much looking forward to catching up and this conversation.
Fantastic. For all the participants on this call, Kari and I have prepared a few questions for the first part of the session, but then I'm happy to also take questions from the audience. So please, if you have them, write them in the chat and then we will address them later on. And yeah, today's company is HelloFresh. Very excited about that. And it's an even greater pleasure to welcoming Daniel to this session. Thank you, Daniel. Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience and then already tell us what is your favorite meal from HelloFresh that everybody on this call can order?
All right. So first a few words for me. So I'm Daniel Chorzelski. I'm currently VP of Strategy and Transformation at HelloFresh. And in my previous life, as Kari mentioned, I was working at Kearney, also in the consumer goods practice, and actually worked on a couple of projects together back in the time. Also then partly on marketing optimization topics and so on. So some memories from, I think, 2017 or so. And I've been then transitioning to HelloFresh in 2020, January 2020. I think I can say a bit more about the trajectory of the company and kind of the growth story that we had over time. And yeah, I think we'll get to that specifically in a few moments. Before we get there, I can maybe explain a little bit about my role at HelloFresh and what I've been doing there the last few years. So the job title says strategy, but it is, I think, a mix of let's say an in-house consulting style role with close proximity to the overall leadership of the company, meaning basically not creating 5-year roadmaps, but rather being quite close to the business. And I think especially in such a scale-up environment, we don't plan that long ahead, simply because the market is quite dynamic and things are moving quickly. So it's rather something that's quite close to the business and has, of course, evolved a bit over time as the company has grown. And before I think Freddie would cover a bit kind of the HelloFresh journey, but just like to give you some feeling for where the company comes from and where it's at today. So we was founded in 2011 in Berlin, selling meal kits. So meal kits basically means you get a box with ingredients and a recipe or a couple of recipes that you can then cook by yourself, weekly changing as a subscription model. So you basically ideally get a box every week and have your dinner taken care of, but still cooking yourself and still with the idea of having this healthy and varied kind of dishes on the menu. This is scaled out to 16 countries and roughly 8 billion in revenue, or as we like to put it, more than 1 billion meals per year. And I can go a bit more into the business model in a moment, but just to give you a feeling for what the company is today. Yeah, and you asked about my favorite dish. That's a good one. We have a couple of ingredients you don't get everywhere else, and one is a certain style of pearl couscous. I don't know if that's the correct translation, but it's basically a couscous that has these pearly balls in it that is has quite a silky texture to it, and it's something I haven't found anywhere else. I mean, I order the box anyways every week, but if this is on the menu, I always get it.
Very cool. I didn't think you were going to say that, to be honest. Great. So, I mean, that's an amazing introduction for anyone that doesn't know the company. I think, as you said, it would be great to get a little bit more into the business model. For those of you, obviously, that don't know, it is a subscription-based business model. It's one of the largest meal kit providers in the world. So if you could elaborate a little bit on that business model and why you think it's been so successful so far.
Yes. So I think on the surface, it looks like a relatively ordinary business, right? We sell groceries at the end of the day, we package them a bit differently, and we provide a recipe for you to cook them. So at the first sight, you might say, well, this isn't so different from what other online grocery players might be doing. But there are a couple of elements that I think make it a quite attractive business model overall. And I'll try to touch upon a few of them. I mean, and every one of those you could probably talk an hour, so I just kind of give you a short intro. I think one that is basically on the demand side, we have, and I think, Carl, this is going to be an interesting topic for you, we are quite well able to target our marketing spend in a way that is probably quite different to any one of our competitors. And the reason for that is we know quite well what the return is we get per customer. So basically, it's a subscription, right? So you know that most customers will not buy one box, but they buy multiple, and you know roughly what is our contribution margin per box. So we can have a very clear idea of what the value is for each customer. That obviously is different based on the channel we acquire them from, and based on lots of characteristics. But it allows us to have a very, very precise allocation of marketing spend and be really data-driven and analytical in how we acquire our customers. And what that leads to is many other businesses basically rely probably on the majority of their conversions on a couple of channels, most of them kind of the big marketing platforms, online marketing platforms. But we have been able to really diversify that and be really precise on how much spend, how much discounts we can give where to still develop a profitable customer base for us. And I think this is overall a super data-driven approach that we've developed. And last sentence on that, because it's direct to consumer, there is no middleman in between us, right? So we have all the data, we know exactly what the customer behavior is, how they engage with the product, how we can reacquire them, how we can get them to refer us, etc. So that means we have a lot of data that then we can really put to use, because we have all the connection to the customer and the different acquisition channels we have. And I mean, I think anyone who also works in or like who tries to optimize marketing efficiency and is not selling direct to consumer, you know how difficult it is to really measure what your marketing spend will deliver. And we circumvent that problem by basically going direct to the consumer and thereby knowing really exactly what our marketing spend is giving us in return.
Super interesting.
Fantastic. I mean, you already mentioned it in the beginning, you are in a very particular niche where it's not food delivery, but it's not grocery. So you take out that step. And I wonder, obviously you joined the company later, but I guess maybe Dominic or Thomas, the founders, told you, especially like how they came up with the idea, and then how to scale that up. I think that's a very fantastic journey, because you redefine a new category, which is rare for companies to do.
Yeah. So I think maybe on the founding and scaling, maybe one of the things I can say. So I wasn't there for the founding, right? So this is not my first-hand information. But of course, there are all these war stories being told from the early days. So a couple of things to say. So we didn't invent the meal kit, right? So I think this is important. So that this was a concept that existed before, but it had previously been done primarily by supermarkets or grocery players who saw it kind of as a side business. And you see that still today, many supermarkets have some sort of a meal kit business, but it's oftentimes not the highest degree of sophistication. And I think the big change was to put this into a direct-to-consumer and subscription model. And this enables then a lot of the benefits. And I think a couple of them I've touched on. I can go into a few more. And then building this out not as primarily a grocery business, which, I mean, of course, we are ultimately a grocery business, but the way we operate tries to follow a lot more the logic of a really highly data-driven tech organization. At the end of the day, we're not a tech organization in the sense of running apps and servers and making our money with that. It's still a real physical supply chain business, but the way we engage with the customer really benefits from having this direct contact, having a high level of data drivenness, and thereby we've been able to kind of take a relatively ordinary business and scale it up much faster than you would otherwise be able to. And maybe like one or two other things to just mention on top of the business model, which I think is quite unique, and I think it's also again not super clear from the outside. And I think talked a little bit about the demand side. Mm-hmm. If you look at the supply side, basically how we deliver our products, we have because it's a subscription business and we have an active customer base, and we know pretty well, have a couple of thousand active accounts in for example in one market. We know 40% order every week, so that we know pretty well what our demand is going to be over time. That means we have very little waste. It's all basically made to forecast with a really high forecast accuracy. So it means we can plan our supply chain pretty well, and thereby reducing waste, etc. in the supply chain. And we have, and I think this is the third point that I think is interesting, we have a really high degree of vertical integration. So basically, we buy what we buy is most of the time basic ingredients like vegetables, proteins, dry goods, etc. That are not very differentiated. So I mean, you buy them from a set of suppliers, but we're not bound to those suppliers. We can also switch, and then we go basically up to the customer doorstep. In most other competitive supply chains, there's like 3 or 4 or 5 companies taking these steps. And by us kind of integrating all the way vertically to the customer doorstep, we are able to capture all of the margin basically of all of these intermediate steps. And in addition to that, and I think I've mentioned this before, be close to the customer and have all of the individual data to make really targeted, precise decisions. And these are kind of 3 aspects that are quite relevant in how we think about the business and how we scale it up, that I think are probably not so visible from the outset.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, that then speaks a lot to the huge growth trajectory that you guys have had. Like, I was reading an FT article just a couple of days ago, and it talked about the revenues for HelloFresh, I think in the second year of operation back in 2012 was only 14.2 million. And in 2023, you reported, I think, 7.6 billion in revenues, which is obviously huge sustained growth over that kind of 10-year period. Can you talk to us a bit about that growth story? I know you've already spoken a bit to kind of the marketing strategy that you've had. What really have been kind of the pillars of getting that growth sustained over such a period of time?
Yeah. Okay. This is again something you could write a book about, but I'll try to give a short answer that tries to cover a bit some different aspects. So maybe there's
time, so you can you don't have to restrict yourself too much.
Okay. All right. So maybe there's 2 important chapters to this growth, and I think one is, let's say, the organic growth period from founding up until like 2019, which was fast growth, but not kind of hyper growth, I would say. And then we had, after 2019, early 2020, which is coincidentally when I joined, we also had kind of the pandemic boost, which I'll get to in a second. And in that first period, so 2011 to 2019, the primary objective was basically getting a product market fit right, developing what the product should look like, and taking it from a very basic product back in the days to a relatively higher level of sophistication. What I mean by that is, in the beginning of HelloFresh, you went to the website, you could order a box, and next week you would get 3 recipes, no choice. It's kind of a fixed menu of very predetermined dishes for you. And then by 2019, we're basically at 30 different recipes for every kind of taste, low calorie, vegan, vegetarian, lots and lots of different options, classic, local cuisine, experimental, whatever. Basically just increasing choice significantly. And this was basically the name of the game for the first couple of years. And then we had I think we were definitely one of the pandemic winners. And this was quite, I mean, looking back, this was quite obvious because restaurants were closed. Many people didn't want to go out for grocery shopping. And we were an option. And I think we went we doubled the business in 2020. So from 2019 to 2020, and doubled again in 2022.
Then you were only in Germany, Europe, or also outside of Europe, like the US, for example?
Also outside of Europe. I can say a few words about the footprint and then kind of go back to the growth story. I think the footprint question is an interesting one. So it was started in Germany, but relatively soon branched out to other markets. And this particularly early markets were Benelux, UK, Australia, and the US. And I think this is also, again, an interesting aspect of the story, because oftentimes if you overextend your geographic reach too soon, you take on a whole lot of complexity that you're not able to handle, and then you have all of these companies that try to grow too fast and it didn't work. How this was made to work quite well at HelloFresh was to have really strong local founding teams with a high degree of autonomy, who basically saw themselves as local founders. So basically, if you talk to the people who started HelloFresh UK, they would be saying, okay, I'm basically the founder of this business. And they had a really, really high degree of autonomy running the business locally. However, based on one single tech platform. So all of the supply chain tech, the consumer-facing side, the app, etc., all of that was always centralized and always one unified platform, but a really high degree of independence to run the local business. And that actually worked really well in terms of scaling and growing. It creates some other issues of later down the road that we're kind of working through now, that everybody has their own solutions, but it works really, really well for scaling the business. And this was already the case kind of pre-pandemic. So pre-pandemic, we already were market leaders in most of the markets we were in. And they're therefore kind of able to capture all of that growth that once then came in as the pandemic hit and demand basically exploded. And maybe a few words on that. So basically, we had 2.5 years of on and off pandemic lockdowns that always spurred demand. But if you remember, we are quite an integrated supply chain. So that means we actually do most of our logistics ourselves. So both pick and pack and last mile logistics. This is not something you can easily scale like in app getting more traffic, right? It's something that you actually have to physically build the supply chain in a way that manages to keep up with that growth. And of course, like in the first month of the pandemic, we weren't able to do that. And we had periods of time where we had to basically close our conversion funnel, basically on our website, put a banner up. You can't order anymore because we are basically maxed out in terms of capacity. And then we had operations teams for I think a good 1.5 years, almost 2 years, only one priority, which is basically adding capacity. And of course, there's many levers to do that, from going to like fewer shifts, like going from 5 or 6 shifts a week to 24/7 production, to building out our production hardware, to scaling our logistics, and was basically a 2-year sprint in trying to achieve that. And I think this is something that's really a point of pride in the company, of having been able to do that, even if this at some points was quite a heavy lift, especially for the people kind of running operations on the ground, but enabled us to capture that growth. And then last sentence on this, there was a big question, okay, we have this big pandemic boost, what happens afterwards? A lot of people will say, okay, it's gonna collapse, like people will not stick with the business, and they will go back to their normal way of grocery shopping. And I think you have seen remarkably little of that. So of course, there are a couple of points where demand has softened a bit, but overall, the pandemic boost and the volumes we've been able to generate have stayed up. And we've continued overall to grow. However, and I think this is clear, we can't continue to grow at 100%. So that means we are now back into more normal territory. And I think this is then a good segue to the question of what's next for HelloFresh. How do we continue that into the future? Because of course, there is no other event on the horizon that I think can give us that kind of a boost. And so we have to work through different growth levers in the future.
And have you felt during that kind of growth story and during the pandemic and kind of trying to struggle to keep up with all of the demand, have you felt any competitive pressure? Obviously, we have, other companies, other players now, like Mindful Chef, with a fairly different kind of proposition to consumers. We have Gusto. Have you felt that pressure as these new companies start and are trying to offer similar propositions as you try to grow?
Yeah. Different ways to answer the question. So I think, as you point out, there are a couple of strong competitors. I think particularly in the UK, the ones you mentioned, it depends really a lot per market. Each market has a bit of a different competitive landscape, and the UK one is for sure the one where the competitors are the strongest. There was a lot of noise in terms of new concepts, similar concepts, grocery delivery options coming into the market, especially 2021. I think we had the huge quick commerce wave where we were like worried all the time what we should do. We actually had a test at the time if we should offer our meal kits with a quick commerce player, so like Gorillas. It wasn't Gorillas, but one of those. We tried that, it didn't work out, and we spent a lot of time worrying about what this would mean for our business. The real answer in the end was that we should probably worry more about our consumers and our customers rather than our competitors, because it turned out that so far none of the competitors have had as big of an effect as we worried at some point in time. I think one reason for that is, even if HelloFresh now has grown a lot in terms of like the overall scale we have achieved, we're still a small fish if you look at overall consumer spend on food and beverage. And I think I know the numbers for the DACH region, so Germany, Austria, Switzerland, it's around 500 billion spent per year. HelloFresh globally is 7.5, 8 billion, right? So it's still tiny, and I think and online penetration is still really low. It's one of the lowest penetrated consumer categories. So I think the direction for us is rather to say how can we get better in our offering, and listen to our customers rather than trying to worry about what our competitors do, because I've created a lot of documents, a lot of slide decks, wondering what they should do, and in the end, none of those were really that useful in the end. But of course, it's always something that's an interesting discussion to have.
Yeah.
Maybe before we talk about the outlook of the company, one thing I was interested in riding this hyper growth pandemic wave, and then also, as you said in the beginning, giving a lot of autonomy to the local teams, plus you're quite vertically integrated. How do you make sure that the standards are the same across the countries? How do you make sure that the experience is the same, right? That you're somebody living in the UK, but then sometimes you're commuting to Germany and you order HelloFresh, and then the experience is completely different, right? Ensure standards and experience, and keep your consumers happy regardless where they are.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. So it actually sometimes made me think of a project I did back in my Kearney days, where we always had the question: what is the right level of localization or centralization in a consumer goods business? And there is obviously these trade-offs between, if you want to be fast and grow and be agile, you localize everything and you give the decision making away. If you want to be efficient, if you want to have scale, like leverage your scale, then you centralize more. And we are, I think, as any business that matures more and it comes out of a hypergrowth period, we are now focusing even more on efficiency and leveraging our scale. And that means what we try to do is, I mean, the thing's not a unique strategy, but we try to still keep the localized aspects on the consumer-facing side. So meaning, obviously, you have a different cuisine you offer for France versus Denmark versus UK versus Netherlands. Like the menu is always localized, the ingredients are always localized, but we try to harmonize a lot more our basically fulfillment tech platform, all of our KPIs, how they work, all of basically the standard processes we run. And this is, as you can imagine, not something we do in a year, but rather that takes a bit of time, because you have to, like in the growth period, we were, as you say, kind of building the plane while flying it. And now you realize, okay, when you do that, there are a couple of things you have to work through afterwards to get everybody kind of following on single set of processes and tools. And yeah, but in short, the answer is trying to keep the benefits of localization while leveraging more the advantages of scale on how we run the business and how we run our operations.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Okay, so final question. I can't believe how time is flying. Talk a little bit about the outlook for HelloFresh. So you already touched on the growth story, that it's going to be difficult to obviously sustain double growth moving forward. So if you can talk a bit about what the focus is going to be in this next kind of phase of growth for both the business, but also for you personally within the business.
Yeah. So I think mostly when I think of HelloFresh, think of the actual HelloFresh brand, and this is probably around 70% of our business. We have, however, over time started to diversify, and there's one very large brand now that's in our portfolio that's called Factor. Factor does ready-to-eat meals, so that basically means you don't have to cook yourself. You get basically a ready-made meal. You just heat up in the microwave, or you heat up in the frying pan or so. This is, of course, a bit of a different use case and a different supply chain, because we like physically have to cook the stuff rather than just putting ingredients in the box. This is now our second biggest business line, and probably around 20% of overall revenues. And then we have a number of additional smaller brands that are also in the meal kit space, but also beyond. And some of them are, for example, the Green Chef. It's a bit more of an upmarket meal kit, focused on really healthy dishes. We have in some markets, we have like a value offering that's more kind of in the discount space. And in addition, we have launched, this is in the US, other categories that follow our playbook. And the playbook is, again, direct-to-consumer subscription, primarily in the food space, and thereby leveraging kind of our overall marketing and supply chain capabilities. And I think two of those to highlight is one, we've launched into pet food. Pet's Table in the US. It's also direct to consumer, upmarket dog food brand. Of course, that isn't at scale yet, but has started to show some traction now. And we are also moving in the US into the vitamins, minerals, and supplements space. So basically, a lot of people might know something like Athletic Greens or AG1. It's basically a subscription where you get like a daily dosage of vitamins, minerals that you can basically then consume for all sorts of health benefits. And what you see with that is we basically try to say, okay, what are our core capabilities? And we know very well how to run a subscription business. We know very well how to run direct-to-consumer marketing and how to run a food supply chain. And if you think, okay, what kind of businesses fit into these capabilities, and of course have traction with the customer. And the idea there is to say, basically, we go from what used to be a single brand, now go to a basically portfolio of different brands that follow the same playbook and build on the same capabilities, but can be in different spaces and different adjacencies. And this is basically then ultimately becoming similar to what many big FMCGs are today, where you have a portfolio of brands that build on the capabilities to run marketing, to run to work with retailers and to run a supply chain. In a similar way, we just do it based on direct-to-consumer subscriptions. And I think so far we have a couple of big successes in terms of especially ready to eat. This Factor brand I mentioned, this has been strongly market leading in the US and has now launched in Europe over the last year. So in the Netherlands, in the Nordic countries, and now recently in Germany. This, I think, has been quite a success. And then the question over the next 2 years is how strongly can we actually build that out over a larger number of verticals. And those verticals obviously have to have some scale, right? So we don't want to go into something that is a minor revenue opportunity, only if it's if we have a prospect to get this into triple-digit million revenues over a reasonable number of years.
Yeah, I was just going to quickly, as a follow-up question, around that selection process of those new kind of opportunity areas, because I guess you do want to avoid having then a really large, complex portfolio, which ultimately isn't necessarily accretive to the overall pie. So, yeah, I don't know if you have any perspectives on how you've gone about choosing those new areas and making sure that they really will be additive.
So basically, I think there's two major questions. One is, and I mean there's many sub questions. One is, I think the one I previously mentioned, does it fit our capabilities and can we really make a difference in this market? And I think again, what's probably our best or our most important skill there is having like really deep knowledge on subscription, like how you run a subscription, how you get customers from ordering a few boxes to making them regular customers, or from ordering once to ordering multiple times, and to kind of what the tools are to get people to order more. This is one big one, and the second one is overall direct-to-consumer marketing at scale. And I think this is, for example, Factor was an acquisition from us, and we managed to grow that by 10x in about a bit more than 2 years, because they basically had a good product but didn't have a very sophisticated marketing. And this is a very good success case. And then the second set of questions is basically, do we believe this is an overall value creation opportunity for us, and not necessarily like achieving high revenues, but achieving a sustainably profitable business line. And I think the vitamin, minerals, and supplement space is interesting because it's never going to be as large in terms of revenue than a a food business. But it's high margin. It's highly predictive. So people who want to take their daily vitamins will do so with a very high regularity. So that means you really have customer acquisition cost once, and then you have a steady stream of income. And thereby you can really economize long term on your marketing spend. And in that sense, we basically evaluate these businesses if they have long-term value creation potential. I think with the vitamins, mineral supplements that just launched, right? So I think you can see this in the US. This is also why I can speak about it openly, right? It's something we've launched, but that's too early to discuss if this actually gets traction, if this will turn out to be a success.
Yeah, very interesting.
Fantastic. Then thank you. So for all the participants of this call, opening up the round, and we had some questions coming in. So the first one is from Senia. If you could elaborate a little bit on the different consumers across markets. You already mentioned the meals are tailored to local cuisines, but if you could elaborate, maybe like, do Danes like to cook more than US Americans? So in terms of frequency, occasions, also maybe overall trends, for example, when it comes to predominantly plant-based diets or keto diets. If you could elaborate, how do the consumer base vary across markets?
So maybe I'll tell a short story that illustrates this a bit. So HelloFresh launched for the first time in France in, I believe, 2017 or 18. And we basically said, I mean, not me, but that was before my time, but basically at the time the thinking was, okay, we have a well-running operations in the Netherlands. It's geographically close. Why don't we basically just offer the Dutch menu as well in France and kind of turn on marketing there and do a relatively quick, agile launch there? And this was done, and it never gained the same amount of traction as we had in some of the other markets. And then you might say, well, obviously the France food culture is different, French food culture is different from other European food cultures. And that realization came in, and then it was basically relaunched and said, okay, we put a proper office there, we put a proper team there that developed recipes only for the French market, French people, obviously, and we have French ingredients and everything localized. And then it kind of went through the roof. So it was a very, very direct correlation. It didn't change necessarily the go-to-market approach, just the product itself was tailored to the French market. I think this kind of just underscores being local is important. Also for countries you would think are similar or are like, everybody knows the French have a distinct food culture, but you might not think, well, Netherlands and Germany, is it so different? Yes, it is quite a different menu. You can have obviously some things. You can both have a Thai curry, but other than that, you have to really localize the dishes. The herbs, the spices, the level of spiciness is always different. The level of, like, do you want a big center of plate piece or a one pot dish rather? For example, UK has a lot of one pot dishes. That's not so much in continental Europe. So you have many of these finer differences between the markets, and over time you have, and this is the good thing about, again, being this direct to consumer, we get recipe level feedback, right? So you can see what do people engage with in the menu. They get every week. You have a list of all the dishes you can pick. Which ones do they look at? Which ones do they actually select? And which ones how do they score them? That basically means we have a constant stream of data to really analyze how we should develop our menu. And there was one famous time, like it was also, I think, 2019 or so. There was a big cooperation with Jamie Oliver, the famous chef, and he developed a couple of recipes because we found, okay, it's a great celebrity collaboration. And it turned out that the recipes the customers didn't really like them very much, because what you can do well in the meal kit is not the same as what a really, really good chef would cook. And what you would expect from a meal kit is that even someone who doesn't cook very well themselves has kind of a success guarantee, so that they in the end like the dish, even if what Jamie Oliver would have cooked might have been a lot better, but it's not what what works in this format.
It maybe linked to that that response, just around, obviously you want to make it as localized as possible so that you really speak to the consumer. Can you talk a bit about then the implications on your supplier strategy so that you still have that scale and you're not kind of then in a small box in France where you're just buying ingredients? Like, how have you maintained the scale from a supply perspective whilst being local?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So again, back in the days, everything was really local, and everybody bought their own potatoes. But that as you said, doesn't really scale. And what we do now is trying to bridge the gap between having, like, at least for example, European-wide purchasing consolidation to have bigger scale, while still having localized ingredients, because that is particularly for protein. It's really important. Everybody gets the local beef or chicken, and every single market wants it local, which is kind of funny, because then you think if it's from Europe, if it's from Western Europe, it should be all the same, but it's not. So people want the local stuff. But we often have suppliers who are also working cross-border, and then they can supply us with like, we have one negotiation where we basically get localized ingredients still. And then there's stuff, for example, like rice or pasta or so that people don't care where it's from, which you can buy at a bigger scale. And again, important trade-off between optimizing for costs, which obviously we want to do, and still ensuring high value perception. So if you over optimize, if you do like value engineering up to the highest degree, people realize and they notice that the ingredients they feel different as if you invest more. And I think this has also been a bit of a back and forth in the business of trying to save a lot more, especially during like highly inflationary times. That obviously was like the 2021 to 2023 period. And then still making sure you deliver value to the customer, or perceived value.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Freddie.
No, just another question from the audience. Are you planning to move into healthy snacking product segment? I think with vitamins, it's very recurring. I guess snacking could be something similar. Is that something that you looked at maybe in the past? Healthy snacking from HelloFresh?
Yeah. So what we do have is what's called the HelloFresh market, where you can basically buy grocery products. So basically you have a regular HelloFresh checkout where you have your box and you select the different dishes you want to have, and then you can, in the market, you can buy add-ons. So like if you want to say I need some cheese or ham for my breakfast or whatever, or dessert, we offer that, and there obviously we also have snacks. Those work well, and it's basically a good AOV, so average order value driver, because we already have the traffic on our side. They primarily come for the meal kits, but they might add a few euros of spend via add-ons. So in this sense, this is part of what we already do. This as a standalone business is unlikely to work, because most people don't buy snacks in bulk, and you would need a certain minimum basket value for this to be efficient. And if you just think of, like, you have to send a box or like a package, if it's only a few euros, it usually is hard to make a profit on that, and it's not a natural subscription. So you would. Some people might say, okay, I want to have a certain number of snacks every month, but most people probably buy them as they buy some other stuff, and this is why it's not something that really naturally fits with subscription business for us.
Clear.
And then I think there's one final question on the chat, just around whether you considered more specialized meals towards certain conditions. The question specifically is on GLP-1 meals, which I believe is helping kind of obviously regulate blood sugar, etc. But I think there's a broader question there around gluten-free, blood sugar friendly meals. Do you see a demand for that, and do you see yourselves going into that area?
Yes, so we've thought a lot about that. There's a couple of challenges with that. So if you claim to be gluten-free, then you are really liable if there's something in that it isn't gluten-free. And in our supply chain, it's difficult to really prove that, because you would have to basically have separation of supply chains and of stock keeping for the stuff that's gluten-free versus the rest. And that has just turned out to be impractical. We have stuff, and again, for gluten-free, it's a particular case. There are people who don't like to eat gluten, and there are people who are really intolerant. And we do cater to people who don't like to eat gluten, and we have like different labels that are kind of a different wording, so we don't get into legal issues, but that cater to people who just prefer not to eat gluten. Then on, let's say, more particular health diets, that also is a bit of a tricky thing, because it's hard to advertise this. So the EU has really strict rules on what you can claim about food. So if you would just to say your food is healthy, which should be like a fine thing to say about something that has a lot of vegetables, it's really, really tricky. There's many, many rules, and therefore making it hard to successfully market this as a benefit. And on the consumer side, people who really have a health condition and can only eat a certain diet, they often have their solutions already in place, and therefore it's difficult to capture that market. And yes, probably not something we would do as kind of a core value proposition. I think on the GLP-1 thing, that's actually interesting. We thought about this, though no solution yet, but I think it's an interesting one, particularly as kind of GLP-1 drugs get more popular in Europe. I think this is definitely a market that has lots of implications for the overall food and beverage space.
Yeah, great. So I'm just going to ask one final question,
sure,
and then we can wrap it up. What keeps you up at night, Daniel? So as you go into kind of this next phase of growth, what's on your mind? What keeps the wheels turning at night?
Yeah, I think the big question for our business, and I think this I mentioned before, is can we go from a successful mono-brand business that has probably reached some level of maturity in terms of growth? Can we go from there to really becoming a portfolio of businesses that is run successfully based on a single platform? And I think this is the big challenge, and there's like so many subcomponents to that I think is probably the one thing that if I had more time to just think about stuff, I would probably try to think more about that. But this is in the busy day-to-day life, it often is sidelined in practice.
Yeah, very nice.
Daniel, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your perspective. And just happy to see HelloFresh doing so well and thriving. Also, seeing a successful European tech food startup is also nice. There's a lot of bad press currently, but so it's fantastic to have one of those success stories, and also interesting to see how you're changing consumer behavior over a long period. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for all the participants, and looking forward to our next session, which will take place in 2025. So Daniel, also from my side, hope you can get some rest over the days, and then full speed ahead next year. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, and have a good day.
Thank you.